They're finished. He's going to be out front.
Okay, I'll do something. Good morning. We'll go ahead and get started. Ed had to go take care of something real quick, so I'll be leading the song this morning before our class. Good to have everybody with us this morning. It's the first day of the week. We're going to come together to enjoy each other's company, but most importantly, worship our Father in heaven. So we're thankful for that. Thankful for those who are online with us. Make sure, let me check something here. All they're looking at is the screen. They don't see what's going on. There we go. Now you can see me. Hi. All right, so it's just good to have everybody. So we'll go ahead and lead our first song, and then we'll be dismissed to our class in song number 25. Anywhere with Jesus I can safely go. Anywhere he leads me in this world we go. Anywhere without him dearest joys would fade. Anywhere with Jesus I am not afraid. Anywhere, fear I cannot know. Anywhere with Jesus I can safely go. Anywhere with Jesus I can go to sleep. When the darkening shadows round about me creep, knowing I shall waken nevermore to roam. Anywhere with Jesus will be home, sweet home. Anywhere, fear I cannot know. Anywhere with Jesus I can safely go. Amen. We're dismissed to our classes. Those that are with us online saying good morning to you all. Glad to have you with us also. This morning with everybody, we'll be continuing back, of course, the book of James. We're looking at the book of James. We're dealing with, basically, with anger while remaining faithful. Brethren, we see this and we talk about there's different types of anger out there. Where we know there's righteous anger, where we know Jesus had, and he had the ability to do that. At times, we may be angry about things, meaning we're not, boastfully going crazy about it or pouting or anything like that. We're just maybe upset with the way things are going in the world, or maybe things that have lost in the past, or whatever it may be. And that's a righteous anger as long as we leave it there and we go with that. But when we get to usually anger, when it comes down to anger, we find here, as we'll read in just a moment, there's usually comes down to two types of anger, the real anger that's out there. So before we read that, we'll go ahead and, before I talk about that, we'll go ahead and read these again. And remember, the word wrath is used here, and that's referring to anger is what is there. So someone go and read that for us, please. James 1, 19 through 21.
So then, my beloved brethren, that every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, slow to wrath. For the wrath of man does not produce the righteousness of God. Therefore, lay aside all filthiness and overflow of wickedness, and receive with meekness the implanted word, which is able to save your soul.
Thank you. So as we've been seeing this, he makes it very clear, to be slow in these certain areas, and, in other words, get your anger in check. Make sure it's in check. And we see by that, we stated there's two types of anger, really, when it comes down to it. Number one, anger outbursts. Someone just goes crazy, just gets mad, upset, maybe throws something, whatever it is. They don't have to do that, but it's an outburst. You can tell they're angry. Then there's this one that a lot of times, people think it's not that bad. This is really bad. If not, we concluded last week probably worse, in a sense, because you're trying your hardest to try to make it better or make up whatever it may be, and the other person's just not going to do it, and they know they're being this way, and they're going to continue that way. And, so these are the two angers that we've dealt with. We went through them last week, and with that we understood that we talked about how important it was to be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to anger. And when we look at this, we really discussed how we are to be quick and be slow. And there's a little bit of all of it. And so I'm not going to go over it again. We ended with everything was there. And it's basically telling us to quick listen to Jesus, listen to God, listen to our Father in heaven, listen to His Word. And then, of course, as we understand, be slow as we slow to speak. Make sure you're hearing everything first before you do that. With all that being said, it brings us to this last one. And that is be slow to anger. And that's what this is all about. And so we see here, when he's slow to anger, when you think about that, about being slow. Does anybody, we all know what slow is, right? Everyone agree, especially if you're on the road and someone's driving in a 60 mile an hour zone, they're doing 40. I mean, it's like, we would consider that what? Slow. Slow, yeah. And and let me say this, whenever you go up to you see a red light turning, it went from green with the yellow and red, and you're still a good 100 yards up, 100 yards away or so. You just keep flooring it. You just keep going and hope, you'll do the best you can to stop as soon as you get there. How many do that? If you wait till the last minute, what's going to happen more than likely? If you're doing 60, you put on the brakes, what are you going to do? You're going to slide. Even with ABS brakes, you're still going to slide. We all know we need to slow down coming up to something like that. It takes you slow down and we come to a stop. Same thing with our anger. We need to learn how to slow it down so we can stop it. And, if it's there, if we have that. So let's go and read this again. I know we just read it, but look at just 19 and 20, pulling them together just by themselves. And someone read that for us again, please.
So then, my beloved brethren, let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, slow to wrath. For the wrath of man does not produce the righteousness of God. Thank you.
So as we see here, James, will go further in explaining why these steps are so important. To be quick to listen, to be slow to speak, to be slow to anger. The question is why? Why do we do that? Well, we know when it comes down to it that human anger does not produce the righteousness that God wants. We all understand that, right? We know when we get angry, is it wrong? When we get angry, anger that's not, that we shouldn't be having, is it wrong? Of course it is. We all know that. And we may not want to admit to it, but it is. So to say this another way, this is what happens. If anger in itself, human anger, does not produce the righteousness of God, then this is what we find it to be. Anger is a destroyer of the soul. That's what it is. It will slowly destroy the soul. It will shrink in it smaller and smaller and smaller. And before you know what I mean by that, we go, wait a minute, you mean our soul's going to disappear? No, what I mean is, it's a destroyer of what God has planted in us, of what we have through His Word, and it just destroys it, and it pulls it apart. And that's how anger is. So anger is not taking, us in the right direction, but the wrong direction. And I want us to just think about some scriptures for a minute about deal with it, knowing that, where do the scriptures describe, angry Christians? Does anyone ever see that? I want to say about it, because people always bring it to me, they'll say, well, Jesus got angry. And I said, I understand the anger, we call it righteous anger, so we know he didn't sin. But let me just ask you this, do we see in the Bible where the Christians are told, you need to be angry about that? Or do we see Christians being angry in the examples found in the Scriptures? Now, I'm not talking about Peter, of course, when we know Peter went up and grabbed the sword, tried to cut off, or I say, cut the ear off, but actually tried to probably cut something else off, and he's just not a good swordsman. But that he wasn't a Christian yet. Remember, that's what I'm trying to say. They're going to be the apostles, but they're not in the church yet in the way Christ, and they saw what he did, what he died for, and so on. So that's what we want to see. Do we ever see that? Bill, go ahead.
Well, the Sanhedrin, in the first instance, was always looking to make Jesus angry. They wanted to see an outburst and just say, look at that fellow right there. Well, we as Christians, fence, or those that are agnostic, or those that don't know what they believe, they're waiting on us to explode.
Yeah.
They're just waiting on that good old Christian right there to explode on somebody and show their true colors, which means we're not really Christians. So we have to be extra careful.
Yep.
Extra careful in the world, even when properly provoked, or not to demonstrate anger that is loud, that is flashy, that is unreasonable, because the world is waiting on that, and they're waiting on us to do that. By the way, we don't have anybody here who does that. I'm just saying that we always have to be careful about that.
Right.
And protect it, and even and resist the urge.
Yeah.
Because they were looking for Jesus.
Oh, you know, there were many times Jesus could have blown up. I mean, many times. And that's exactly what they wanted to, and he didn't. I mean, he kept us calm. And then you start thinking later, you start looking at the apostles, the way they react to things like, wow, they're starting, you don't see really anger. They don't go around saying, if you don't do this, you know, I mean, trying to hit people and say, you're going to hell, it's way. They wanted to explain what you do to get to heaven. And they were showing that. And that's where we see the same thing all throughout that with the Christians. Then things change over time, and we see kind of wars, of Christian wars against Muslim wars. We see those things happening throughout. When we got asked, is that really what God wanted? In the Old Testament, we understood it, but is that really what He wanted under the New Testament? And remember, I don't believe that's the way it is. We see that, you know. We say we've gone what we call the regular wars. We haven't really done what we would call a religious war, because people will call America, used to call it Christian, but really you look at it now and you wonder, what is it? And so we see those and find what's there. But Brother Clifford, go ahead.
I think one of the things that help us in, preventing to come to the anger to the point that we sin and have those outbursts that we're discussing right now is that if we know more Scripture and if we know more Bible, we can recall upon that at the time that we see that we are about to get to that point where we can lash out in anger. You know, we can be reminded of the Scriptures that we have in our hearts.
Right.
You know, that helps us, and the love that Jesus had, you know, for us, you
Yes.
know, and the world will help us also to become really slow to anger and wrath, just as Jesus did when He was tempted on the mountain, you know, by Satan. He started quoting Scriptures.
Yeah. That was exactly right. I mean, and it is true, you know, I think the biggest part with anger is we need to learn how to basically recognize it, you know, when it's coming upon us, you know, and I think the more mature we get in the Bible, the more mature we get in the Word, we'll recognize it quicker. And you know, and that's when we slow it down if it's there, you know, if we have that. But it's so true, as we see here, what the Scriptures, as we think about it, like I said, I want to think about that for a moment, is, you know, where do we see Jesus telling the disciples to be angry? He doesn't. In fact, He tells them, we're going to do things different from what you thought you might be doing. Because remember, they thought Jesus was coming to establish an earthly kingdom. The majority, even the apostles, before they were apostles, disciples. And to do that, you had to start a what? You had to start a war. You had to start a war against the Romans. And that's what they were looking for. And Jesus said, that's not what I'm here for. Because what we learn is the anger that we would see residing in the anger that's not right does produce, you know, I guess, does not produce righteousness in God. And far too often, you know, some people may be thinking, it's not okay maybe it's okay to be angry from time to time, but it's also okay to be angry with God. I mean, you know, we need to ask ourselves for that for a moment. What has God ever done to us to make us angry? It's just the opposite, isn't it? God's done so much for us, we should be what? Thankful, joyful, you know. And what happens is people get in situations and they get angry with God. But my question is this, do you really want to be angry with God? You know, does anybody in the world really want to be angry with God when you start reading about God? When you start reading about Christ and everything with it? We know that anger is not going to reside where? In the end. Anger will not reside in heaven. There is not going to be any anger in heaven. And so we see that's one of those things that we need to do our best to discard in this life. And I know we may get angry from time to time, but we learn how to act from the inward out, and that's what we say, soul with the body, not the body with the soul. So our anger, when it comes down to it, if we look at Jesus, we look at the apostles, it's basically, and a lot of times you may not want to hear that, it's based on selfishness. And it's not that you maybe are meaning to be selfish at all when you get angry, but it happens, and it's against usually somebody else. And as we pull that in, and we just see how we desire to take care of that. In fact, I believe James here is in a sense not quoting, but it's pretty close, quoting what it says in the book of Proverbs. Notice this one here. So I'm going to read that for us. Proverbs 29, verse 11. You don't think this guy's angry, do you? Not at all, right? Okay. 29, verse 11.
A fool vents all his feelings, but a wise man holds them back.
Think about that. So a fool vents all his feelings. Now this is very important. Here we go. Why was the word all inserted in there? You know, because what happens when somebody becomes foolish and angry, usually what comes out? Everything. Sometimes somebody that may not even want to or say, I didn't say that to you. Yes, you did. No, I did not. You know what I mean? And that's that losing control in the sense of what is there. But the wise man, here he says, the wise man knows, notice, the wise man knows he's getting angry, or she getting angry. But notice what they do. They do what? What does it say?
Hold them back.
Hold them back. Now, I've had people tell me before, don't hold your anger in because, you know, you're going to fill that pail up and it's going to fall over sooner or later. It's going to be dumped and someone's going to catch it all and I'm afraid it's going to be me. You know, and when we see that. But, you know, this is where we learn when we see it with anger. He isn't saying hold it back and just hold it inside. He says get rid of it. Go to God. Tell God what's going on. Ask God to help you through it. And that's what we see. Proverbs 14, another very good one. So I'm going to read that one for us, please. Proverbs 14:29.
Whoever is slow to anger has great understanding, but he who has a hasty temper exalts folly.
Thank you. The word folly, foolishness, as we would understand, this sounds a lot like James, doesn't it? I mean, it really does. And so, you know, James has a lot of wisdom in it. That's why I like the book. It's a lot like there's other Proverbs where we see the wisdom that's found there within it. So wisdom is found in listening, not in anger. Anger is not wisdom, correct? We all know that. Anger is not righteous. Anger is not, you know, bringing us closer to God. Anger usually is thinking about self and does not think about others. And so what we need to do is we need to let James' words basically hit us like a 2x4. I mean, just come upon us and like wow, I got it. I get it. You know, the light comes on. And we see that here. So as we think about that righteousness God desires is not being produced in me, I need to fix it. Now let me say this before I go for Rocky tomorrow. One second. Bill said something earlier, and I want us to realize, you know, how we are to be to those outside seeing us. We are human, are we not? We are human. And I've heard some say, well, as an elder shouldn't do nothing wrong ever. Is an elder a human? Okay, and you know, and when you start classifying, you got like, hold on a minute, let's just do this. What about all Christians? Elders are Christian before they're an elder, and we see this. Who is human? All of us. We all make mistakes. The apostles made huge mistakes. And we're questioning to God. You know, we're told, you can't be like that. Even Paul had to confront who? Peter. Now, what came down to that is the way Peter handled it. And the way Paul handled it. It was in a way that was very courteous, I guess the easiest way to put it. Even though he was very stern with Peter, but it still did that. Mom, go ahead. Do you have a comment, or Dad?
No.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, in the King James, the Proverbs, I don't know where it is.
14, or the one below behind it?
No, the 29:11.
Mm-hmm.
A fool uttereth all his mind, but a wise man keepeth it in till afterwards.
Right. So in other words, after the person's gone, or the incident, the problem, whatever's taking place. Yeah.
Well, it may be till after the person has he's got him to calm down,
Mm-hmm.
and then he says, well, this is the way it should be.
Right. And it does. I mean, you know, sometimes you get mad. You do got to take a minute to calm down. And we see it. That's so right. Bill was next. I'll come back to Dad. Bill, go ahead.
Yeah, I was very human 2 weeks ago when a client used profanity against my paralegal, and I called him up, and it was not a pleasant conversation. He's not going to use profanity against her anymore, but I didn't feel that good about myself after I got done with it.
Yeah.
I've had another conversation with him since then. He said I went overboard, but I didn't like it.
Yeah. And that's the part, you know, when we do fall into that temptation and the sin that's there in it, because it is we need to remember that we need to make it right. That's what it's all about. You need to make it right. Sometimes we could just go to God and ask forgiveness for certain sins, but sometimes does it include other people? It does, and we see that, especially when he's talking about Christians, going a Christian against a Christian, and we see that, and that's where they're, and, you know, that's what Bill just said, you know, that we're all human, we are, and we see it. Bill, go ahead.
I represented a faithful Christian near Mobile, Alabama, who was a principal in school, and a 14-year-old kid used the worst profanity against teacher. I mean, the worst. And buddy, he put his forearm and slammed him against that wall and said, "You better never talk to that teacher again. How dare you do that?" Of course, he got in trouble. It worked out. But he felt so bad that he had that anger. I don't know that it was a righteous anger, but I'm just going to say that he behaved in a way that was not as he should have. But look, you know what? The reason we won that case is everybody to a person understood it.
Yeah.
It was out of line conduct, but now the principal shouldn't have done it. I mean, he says I shouldn't have, well, he put me against that wall, so you better never talk to that teacher that way again. It just went all over it. So I understood the conduct, I think the board did, and it wound up working out, but he'll never do that again, I'll say that to you. Secondarily, he's an incredible faithful Christian, and it just really flew all over me. And we witnessed that, don't we?
Well, we do.
We see that, we want to make it right, and he did.
That's right. So we'll hear that, and back to Mike, go ahead.
Okay. You know, we're talking about trying to hold the anger and so forth. In Proverbs 15, I don't know if you're heading there.
Go ahead.
15, 1 and 2 says, "A soft answer turns away wrath, but harsh word stirs up anger. The tongue of the wise uses knowledge rightly, but the mouth of fools pours forth foolishness." I try to think about these verses when I get into those situations. Humans don't always get there, but I try my best to think about Proverbs 15.
Yeah, Proverbs 15 is a great place to read and look at and meditate on. I guess you'd say the best thing. Mike, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, in the times that we live now, with the challenges we face, we're going to be really challenged. I mean, I think more so in the way that the world looks right now. So we have to be extremely faithful and strong to sustain it.
That's right. It's exactly right. It's important, all that, and it all comes with it. You know, in the world doesn't see, a lot of times the world doesn't see anger wrong to a sense. You know, like, I mean, if someone hits you, you just better do what? Hit them back. I mean, that's what was taught. Now in school, if you teach your children that nowadays, you know, you tell your child, they hit you, you hit them back. What's going to happen?
Defects is going to be called.
Both of them are going to get in trouble, we see, but let me say this. I'm not telling you to tell your child, be a pacifist. That's not what I'm saying at all. Because even Jesus didn't do that, made it very clear. But at the same time, we look at this, and you know, those are just examples. There are things that we need to think about that are going to come about us, and we need to be already aware of how we're going to handle it. That's really what it is. And if you know the Word of God, you learn how to handle it. And I think what's interesting was a soft answer. You know, I think back to the prison days, you know, working with prison, and when I was a drill instructor for the state boot camp, you know, all you did was yell. That's what you did, just like military boot camp. You just yell, and constantly, and it's you know, you learn that with your voice, but you get so used to it. And then I'll never forget. We were in Bible class, and those verses came up, and I was like, wonder how different that would be. And now I know we had to do certain things in boot camp, but when I got them alone, and I never talked quiet before. The first one I had a problem with, and I told him, not the first one I had problems, but the first one I did this on, I got real quiet. And I said, "You're going to listen to me. This is what's going to happen." And he got scared to death and told me afterwards. He said, "I've never seen you quiet like that. I thought you were going to do something you shouldn't have done to me." And I was like, "Why would I do that?" You know, I'm thinking that way. But he goes, but afterwards I asked him, I said, you know, I said, "Well, what are you going to do about it?" He goes, "I'm going to do what you said. I'm going to respond to it." Other times we've had where you scream and holler, you know, and they run off and hit you. I mean, and you just have to be careful with that. But I've learned over that when I left there to another prison that I tried to change that over to a soft answer as a sergeant, as a lieutenant, and my life was so much easier in the prison doing that. And it's like, yep, God's 100% right, like always. And you see that there. And so it's important. Not that you're letting you get away with something, but you can do it in a certain way and be right about it. Okay, I got a couple more hands up. Bill, do you have yours first? Bill was first, Evan.
There seems to be a lessening of accountability and conduct, and there seems to be more reasons for a Christian to be angry. So
yeah,
it really seems to be dominant, prevalent. people's words, their actions, it just seems there's lessening of accountability and conduct. So the guard has to be up.
Oh, yeah.
Really, really all the
Yeah.
time.
And you're right, I think we're being tempted more and more by the devil with our society is going on. And so I'll go to Dad and I'll go over here back to Doug.
A couple of things you mentioned a minute ago about knowing that you're going to have to go and talk to someone and trying to hold back. Best time in the world to pray before you go and do that. God help me to maintain my temper so that you don't have this conflict. And then a lot of folks may not believe this, but I kind of feel this way, that not only the soft answer, but also when you do that, you're calmer. And I think people sense when you're calm because you send off those nonverbal communications. When you're angry, you're pointing fingers, and just like this guy here, and you're doing all of that. And the individual senses that he's being or she is being attacked. And when you use what God gives us as the tools, you're right, your life is much better. Because I did the same thing when I worked at the prison.
Yep. I mean, most people did. That was the way of being it. It was terrible, but that's how it was. And you change it, it's surprising how much easier it made your life. Doug?
Well, I agree with Ed there because I was in management for 40 years. And the very few times that I ever get in a shouting match with one of my employees. Now, another boss, I got into a shouting match several times with them over things. But I felt like it was always better for me to turn around and walk away from a bad situation and then go back to it and talk to that person in a reasonable voice than it was to talk to them right then, because a lot of times I would say more than what I needed to say. But I don't get aggravated with other people as much as I get aggravated with myself. I have, when I do something dumb, I just really, I'll just blow up with my own self.
Yeah.
And I have trouble controlling my temper sometimes with that. And I mean now, and it's my own self that's getting myself in trouble.
And that makes perfect sense. As you said, it could. We're harder on ourselves than anybody else. That's just the way we are. We're built as humans. That happens. But we learned to change that. Do a little different. We're like, wait a minute, okay. And like you said, have you ever? I've gotten angry before, and have you ever? I thought about that, and I thought, what if I whisper to myself? If that would work too. You know what I mean? And it does. It actually does. I'm just like, and Melissa's like, what are you doing over there? I'm just like, it's okay. Don't worry about it. And we see that. But Doug, the thing that we were saying a moment ago, as we see with Brother Clifford as we're talking there is, you're recognizing things. Like you recognize you needed, when you got to that point, you needed to do what? Walk away for a moment. And that's where God tells us there in Corinthians, where he talks about that temptation, giving us a way of escape. That's the quickest way to do it, isn't it? And now that you're trying to, be quiet from them, like that other anger, but you're actually trying to calm down to where you can talk. And earlier, too, it was said, is that when you are calm, you can think about what you're going to say before you say it. When you're angry, like this guy right here, it's what that means. You don't even know what all you said sometimes. It was so fast and so mean and angry, and it comes to that. Bill, go ahead.
So many good reasons to be here from 10 to 11, but Brother Spivey's comment on recollection of the verses that we've studied, committed to bear me at heart. I have a new beautiful verse that you pushed up there, and it's going to pop in my brain, Proverbs 29:11.
Yeah.
I'm going to do my best to be that wise man and hold it back. It's a great verse, it really is.
Oh, yeah.
And that's a great thing, that's a great tool to have, is to have that recollection now, and it works wonders.
Exactly, that's exactly right. It comes down that, in a Christian life, we want to pick things that are friends to us. And what I mean by that, not just people, but things of society, things of, the world that we're a part of. Things that are friends of us that would be good to us, would treat us right, that we would treat them right. And what I mean by that is anger is not our spiritual friend. Anger is just the opposite. We all understand that. We realize that, and we go back and forth through it and we see it. So, brings us to this point. How much time have we got? I don't have time. Is this point right here is okay, Ernie, it's there. We've all talked about it. How do we solve it? Are there steps to solving anger problems? Does James give it to us? Does he actually talk about it here? And he does. He does. A lot of times, if you notice your Bible, if you have your Bible right there, you'll look at James 1, and you'll notice that that 21 starts a new section, basically. It's usually the chapter's a little darker, you know, that verse right there. And so the number. And so it shows, if your Bible does that, it breaks it down into sections, what to study. These 3 go together, these 5 go together. 21, to me, from my studies, I believe went with the ones above we just looked at. But it also goes with the ones below. And that's where you kind of break it up. But they do that all the time in the Bible. So I believe to see this, to solving our anger problems, comes down to verse 21, is what it comes down to. And so we'll read this. This is what we see, as we see Clifford was saying earlier, was about the Word of God being in you, you know, putting it in here. That's what this next verse is. Someone go ahead and read that for us, see what it says.
Therefore lay aside all filthiness and overflow of wickedness, and receive with meekness the implanted word, which is able to save your souls.
Thank you. So here we see how to solve the anger issue that's out there. James does not end the paragraph, this is interesting, by telling us to be slow to anger or to just stop being angry. He doesn't say that. He doesn't say it like that. James is going to get underneath the problem so that we can pull sin out by the roots. We can pull everything out of this area and try to get rid of it. You know, we talked about this a couple weeks ago about, you know, basically our temptation to sin, you know, to a point, it points to a bigger problem. That's important to see. Temptation to sin, and if we fall into that temptation, it points to a bigger problem. Our temptations reveal the desires of our hearts. That's what the Bible tells us. That sin shows that what is there. You know, sins are symptoms of the problem. And, you know, we learned that a couple weeks ago in the class setting of seeing that. Evil desires are a problem that need to be crucified and transformed. Sins are the actions that come from desires. And that's why James is very careful saying, be careful what you desire in this life. Yeah, go ahead.
This is a crazy kind of analogy, but you know, when we were obedient to the gospel, the seed was planted. You know, we know that Jesus said there's different soils, and the seed is planted in each of those. These things are weeds that choke out the word.
Yep.
It says, receive with meekness the implanted word. The seed will grow and flourish if you get rid of these weeds.
Right. Exactly. I mean, that's exactly it, and that's why we see those are problems. You know, those are, you know, and we said that, you know, anger, you know, is once again the symptom of the problem. Sins are symptoms of the problem. The problem is in the heart, we say. So James is going back to help us attack the problem. And here it is. Here's what verse 21 tells us, the first thing. Get rid of all moral filth and prevalent evil. Now let's think about this, what we're saying. We may be surprised with this first response, you know, this first thing to do, to get rid of all moral filth and prevalent evil. Now, let me ask you this. You may have an anger problem. I don't know who has an anger problem, who doesn't. And, you know, and you ask yourself, you know, I've tried to get rid of it, and I can't. That's guess what you need to do. Look what James said. This is the very first thing. He says, search out the things that are moral filth that are in your life. Or, you know, that are prevalent evil in our lives. You notice that he did not say that the solution to our anger problem is to surround ourselves with people who do not make us angry. You know, that's good. I mean, yeah, that's a good feeling. It feels great. But he said that's not how you fix it. Because you're not always going to be around who? Christians. Or say, you know, I've had Christians make me angry too. But no, you know, we look at this, we go, you know, we're not always going to be around the people that don't make us angry, are we? We have to step out of that sometimes, and when we do, if we don't control it, we say, well, I'm just going to step around our people, you're going to blow up. You know, those things are going to happen. So as we look at that, so we also understand that he does not say that the solution to our anger problem is to do with, you know, what you want spiritually. If you figure what you want spiritually, then you won't be angry at God anymore, or other people, or other times. That's not true. It's a good thing to have, but that doesn't take care of all of it. He says the solution is to get rid of the moral filth and abundance of evil in our lives. And we go, wait a minute, what do you mean evil? Let's just go back to that for just a moment. Go back to that verse again. Look, therefore lay aside how much filthiness? And I want you to think, we go, okay, how do we define filthy? Just define it yourself. Define what you think is filthy. I mean, in this world, it's that simple. Because I've had people say, well, my filthy may be different from your filthy. I'm like, okay, all right. I said, well, define what your filthy is. I said, I guarantee you, you're going to see things in your life. Even though you might want to say, no, I really don't want to think that's filthy. Oh, yeah, it really is. I mean, and you know, and we see that, which brings us, says, an overflow of wickedness. What he means by that, he's not saying that we are wicked in everything we do. Wickedness overflows this world. That's what we see happening. And we have to live in this world. We have to be of the world, we have to live in it. And while we're here, that's what happens. And when that overflow of wickedness spreads its wings and starts moving out, what is it going to try to touch? Us. Every time. And that's where we get to that next point. So this is where he shows this first thought, you know, is basically getting rid of that and moving in that direction, knowing that anger tells us that there's still something going on in our heart, and we work on it. You know, solving our anger problem is not addressing external things that get to us mad. Because let me say this, most people, and it can amaze even when we counsel people, most people, what happens is they say, well, I need to figure out the things around me that are making me mad. That's what I need to do. I need to get rid of these external things. Gotta wait a second. Is that really the problem? Or is it somewhere much deeper? You know, we said about getting mad at ourselves. You know, we do that. We see that. So here we get to this point of warning that we will be tempted to think, this next point, that we're not angry. Have ever done that before? You know, when you get angry and someone's like, you're angry. No, I'm not angry. No, I'm not angry. You know, is that, everyone's like, wow, okay, I'm going crazy. All right, so when you think about it, that's what, and you're like, okay, maybe I am angry. And, you know, that's, we don't want to tell ourselves, because we'll be tempted to do that. So we need to ask others, here's what you do. You ask others if you're angry, or when you're angry. Guess who's the best people to ask? Children, your friends, your spouse, of course. And be sure to ask, here's the important part. If we do have an anger issue, or we have an anger from some time, whatever happens, you know, give them permission to tell us when we're being angry. Why is that so important? Because if someone's angry quite often, guess what that person's not going to come up and say? You're angry. Why are you angry? Like, because they know then you're going to get what? Angry. That person's going to get angrier. And so you do that, and you remind them, you know, and let them remind you, remember what you told me? The permission. I'm not trying to be mean or anything, but you know, you're building up to that. And you know, there's where it comes down to is we don't recognize it, but somebody else might. And then once we go, okay, we look at that, we go, huh, that's real, that's true. And we learn to deal with it. We learn to recognize it. And once we recognize anything, it's easier to deal with, isn't it? That's like when you drive. First time, you know, when you go get your permit, you take that test. They take a test here for a permit, a written test. They take a test. It's got signs on it and everything. Does that going to make sense when I say, okay, all right. So the test you take, you know, and those signs, you have to put those signs to basically what? Memory. I mean, because when you're driving down the road, sometimes you can't read the word, but you know what the sign is by just looking at it. You get an idea of it. You know, signs. That's the same thing with anger, whatever may be out there, any kind of temptation. There are signs that pop up here, and here, and we need to be able to recognize each and every one of them. If one of them we don't recognize, it's going to get through. But once it gets through and we know we've sinned, sometimes it's like, wait a minute, I need to figure out how to recognize that one. And then keep doing that. And that's how we go through it. And we're going to end there because I'm out of time. We will talk about this next week. Just this last, number 2 here, is basically, you know, look at the rest of the verse where it says humility. It says meekness. That's humility. Receive the implanted word which will save your souls. We'll look at that next week. That one, you want to do a little bit about it. And we see here, and I believe the greatest place, you may want to go read it, the Parable of the Sower. It is a perfect example of what's going on here with James for us. All right, we're going in there. Anybody else before we close? How much questions? No? All right, thanks. Appreciate it.